It's a real honor to be here with you today. We're here in the backyard, and so you might hear some amazing noises from our neighbor's dogs to the creaking of the wood. My son is actually shooting some hoops, so we might hear some of that, but it's all good. I wanted to come to the backyard to share kind of an intimate and important story. It's a longer one, and so I ask for your patience, but a super important one. It's one of my favorite stories of all time. It's When Harriet Met Sojourner. This one is written by Catherine Clinton and illustrated by Shane Evans. Let's go ahead and check it out. When America was young and new and wanting to be free, not everyone in America was free. Now I gotta stop right there because I don't know that America was new when this is saying it was new. We have to remember this is not a nation of immigrants. This is a nation of indigenous people, and indigenous people have been here thousands of years. So when we hear stories of a new America to who and by whom? So this is still a powerful story, but sometimes we gotta check the content that we hear. Although it was a land of promise, yes, a land of real promise, not all promises were kept. Two strong, brave black women wanted America to fulfill its promises to allow each and every American to be born free and live in a land of equal opportunity. This is their story, the story of Harriet Tubman and Sojourner Truth and how their paths crossed. Oh, I can't wait. We're going to first start off unpacking a little bit about who Sojourner Truth was, according to this book. Take a look at that image right there. Sojourner Truth was born first. Sometime around 1797, near the Hudson Valley in upstate New York. She was born the daughter of enslaved parents owned by a wealthy Dutch planter. They gave her the name Isabella, and she took her father's name, Bone Free. Isabella Bone Free. Bone free, but not free. Bone free means tall tree in Dutch. The name suited Isabella well. She grew strong and tall, bending like a willow while working the fields alongside her 12 brothers and sisters. Can you imagine 12 brothers and sisters all working in the fields from sun up to sundown? Now that's intense. It's really, really intense. Now we're going to get introduced to young Harriet Tubman. Beautiful imagery. As the crow flies hundreds of miles south from Isabella's birthplace, it might align on the eastern shore of Maryland, where sometime around 1825, a young slave girl named Araminta was born. Araminta's parents loved and cherished their sons and daughters, but could not protect them from the evils of slavery. Two of her sisters were snatched away, stolen off and sold south. They were gone, but never forgotten. I gotta just stop right there. Can you imagine two of your family just being snatched away and taken into slavery and sold off to somebody else? That's criminal. Absolutely criminal. And unimaginable. Araminta, she dreamed of freedom, of flying away with her whole family. She did not know how or when, but yearned for flight. One day in freedom, she would be known as Harriet Tubman. This is the way they were treating Isabella. Isabella this, Isabella that, forced to obey a parade of masters from dawn to dusk, sent from farm to farm, away from her brothers and sisters, away from her parents. Poor Isabella. Once she was sent to a farm where they spoke only English. Remember, she spoke Dutch and could not understand, could not make herself understood. Imagine you're coming in and you're speaking another language and everybody's coming at you all kinds of ways in their language, and it's hard to connect. She tried and tried to be good and obedient, and everyone knew she was a good worker, but an English master called her names, and he even beat her. She vowed when she grew up she would leave slavery behind and be poor Isabella no more. She would defeat those who have tried to defeat her and rename herself Sojourner Truth. The power of being able to name yourself. That's freedom. Take a look at young Harriet. It's important training that she's going to get right here. Araminta, too, worked hard, moving from one master to another, hired out from the age of 7. Imagine, age of 7 and you're working. But one day when one of her friends from the fields was trying to get away from an angry overseer, Araminta tried to protect him. When the overseer threw a heavy piece of lead, it hit Araminta instead of her friend, smashing in her skull and knocking her to the ground. She was almost killed. One of our freedom fighters was almost killed. Carried home half dead, Araminta was nursed by her mother, who sat by her daughter's bedside and told Bible stories and listened to the stories that she heard about of David and Goliath, of Daniel in the lion's den, of Moses and the Red Sea. It was nearly a miracle when she finally recovered, but Harriet's scar would always be with her, a reminder of slavery's evils and a symbol of her courage and willingness to help others. Now, it's important that you understand what Mom was doing was revolutionary. Not only was Mom taking care of Araminta, but she was teaching her from a Bible that was not given to black people. A Bible back then called the Negro Bible removed everything that had to do with Moses and people freeing themselves. You see, that biblical text is a text of freedom. However, that was taken away from black people. And so Mom had to find a way to be able to tell these stories. Take a look at this. Isabella grew and grew until she was 6 feet tall. She was one of the strongest workers in the field, and not a man could best her. She worked hard, but a yearning for freedom rose like a sap within her. She married another slave and had 5 children, her daughters and son like branches reaching from her sturdy trunk. When New York passed a law outlawing slavery after 1827, Isabella thought that God had answered her prayers. Her master promised to free her in a year. She counted the months and weeks and days until she might leave slavery behind. This is Araminta at home. If you look closely, she's got a needle and she's quilting. Araminta hungered for freedom as well. She lived in fear of the auction block. One of her loved ones, or she herself, might be put up for sale, sold to the highest bidder, and shipped off, never to be seen again. So like the quilt that she worked on, one square at a time, she pieced together her plans for running off to the north. It took patience and skill. It took listening and learning. She needed reliable advice about an escape route. She had great faith. Faith she was made for bigger things. And she knew she would find those things once she crossed over from slavery to freedom. Let's take a look at that process. Here you see young Isabella, aka Sojourner Truth. Actually not young anymore. Isabella patiently waited 12 long months before asking her slave master to emancipate her. When she finally confronted him, her owner broke his promise and said she must stay enslaved just a little longer. But Isabella was tired of waiting and broke the chains herself. She walked out and left slavery behind. When her master illegally sold her son away, she went to court to win him back. Isabella became a tower of strength for family and friends. When she gave herself a new name, Sojourner Truth, it symbolized that she felt born again, born into freedom and committed to helping others find freedom as well. Take a look. When Araminta's master died in 1849, all she could think was sold away. She was going to be sold away, just like her sisters. So within months of her owner's death, Araminta stole off from her Maryland home. It was hard to leave her family behind, hard to leave her husband, John Tubman, but she feared it was now or never. The midnight sky and silent stars were her only companions on her flight to freedom. After she made it safely north, she found a community to welcome her and took a new name, a freedom name. She took the name Harriet, which was her mother's name. As Harriet Tubman, she was finally free. And as Harriet Tubman, she would become a legendary leader for those seeking freedom. It is those kind of leaders that we need for these times right now. Take a look. Sojourner Truth preached and lectured all over the North, from the shores of Massachusetts to Ohio's fruited plains. She made stirring appeals to emancipate both slaves and women, and her deep, booming voice cast a spell over listeners. Once, when a man told the audience that women were weak and needed protection, that women couldn't take care of themselves, Sojourner Truth got angry. She stood up all 6 feet of her and held out her arm, an arm made strong by years of slave labor, and asked, "Aren't I a woman?" And what became a famous quote is, "Ain't I a woman?" Sojourner stepping up to her power and her truth. Harriet Tubman was only 5 feet tall, but became a giant among her people by working with the Underground Railroad. The network of blacks and whites and indigenous people too, who secretly guided runways and runaways to safety. It was not a railroad, nor was it underground necessarily, but it was a powerful resistance movement trying to defeat unjust laws. And it might be something we need today. Harriet dodged bloodhounds and bounty hunters, guiding many escaped slaves all the way to Canada and also all the way down to Mexico. She told her admirers, "I never lost a passenger." Harriet became the most famous Underground Railroad conductor in the years leading up to the Civil War. When the Civil War began in 1861, both Sojourner Truth and Harriet Tubman continued their campaigns against slavery. Tall, fiery Sojourner gave speeches across the North, heating up her audiences to convince men to enlist in the Federal Army to join the battle to defeat the Confederates. She was a staunch defender of the Union cause. Harriet Tubman, cool and collected, worked as a spy behind enemy lines in South Carolina. With an iron nerve, projecting a sense of calm before the storm, she led men in uniform on midnight raids, ignoring the danger as she always had. Wow. This is that moment. When Sojourner Truth was on a speaking tour in the fall of 1864, she stopped off in Boston for a visit. It just so happened that Harriet Tubman was in Boston as well, taking time off from her wartime duties in the occupied South. No one took notes or reported on the meeting at the time, so we could only imagine what they might have said to one another. The OGIS Meeting. After hearing about one another for many years, they must have warmly embraced, as if finding a long-lost relative. The tall one wore glasses and spoke with a Dutch accent, while the short one still had some of that southern drawl. But they were connected by a kinship that went deeper than language, perhaps even deeper than blood, a kinship of spirit, a kinship of revolutionaries standing up for freedom. They had much to offer one another, because Sojourner had been fighting slavery for a lot longer than Harriet. Yet even though she was decades younger, Harriet had many adventures to share, carrying slaves to freedom on the Underground Railroad and fighting Confederates, exploits Sojourner would have wanted to hear about. Oh, look at that image. Just powerful. When their paths crossed in Boston that October day in 1864, there was no photographer to record the occasion, no newspaper interview to highlight this historic meeting. And when they parted, Harriet and Sojourner did not know if they would ever see one another again. But sharing stories built a friendship, with the memory of time together keeping them close, even when miles apart. It was a memory these legendary women carried with them for the rest of their days. Sister Harriet, Sister Sojourner Truth, together at last. We see some real pictures of Sojourner and of Harriet. Thank you so much for tuning in to this Homies Empowerment Ethnic Studies online community story time. Just thinking about the union between Harriet and Sojourner is powerful. And now that these ancestors have passed, we might be going through a difficult time right now. You might be going through a difficult time right now. But you carry intergenerational wisdom in your veins. What if you sat down and you began to write a love letter to yourself? But that love letter came from an ancestor like Harriet or Sojourner. Now, they don't have to be your blood relatives, but they might be your political relatives, your historical relatives, people that have stood up for freedom, that might have some advice for you during these difficult times. What would they say? How would they say it? I can't wait to read your letters. If you take the time to write yourself a love letter from the ancestors, we would love to read it at Homies Empowerment. Just send it to homiesempowerment@gmail.com. If you can, please subscribe, please share, and please pass this on. Many blessings to you.